He rescued a giant Apache woman from the river. Next day, her father came with an unexpected reward. The water was deeper than it looked. By the time Boone Carter realized something was wrong, the current had already claimed what appeared to be a massive figure struggling against the rapids. Most men would have kept riding. Most men hadn't seen what he'd seen in those desperate movements. The deliberate, calculated strikes of someone who knew how to fight, even against drowning. She stood nearly 6 feet tall when he finally dragged her to shore. Water streaming from buckskin that seemed to have been crafted for someone of unusual size and strength. Her eyes held a sharpness that made him step back instinctively. This wasn't just any woman. The intricate beadwork on her clothing, the way she carried herself even while coughing up river water, everything about her suggested importance. But she spoke no English, and when she looked at him, there was something in her expression that felt less like gratitude and more like evaluation. She disappeared into the wilderness before dawn, leaving only wet footprints and a single eagle feather beside his bedroll. Boone assumed he'd never see her again. The assumption lasted exactly 18 hours. When the sound of approaching horses reached his camp the next evening, Boone counted at least a dozen riders. They moved with the discipline of warriors, but there was something ceremonial about their formation. At their head rode a man whose presence seemed to command the very air around him. Older, bearing scars that told stories, wearing regalia that spoke of leadership. The man's eyes found Boone immediately. When he spoke, his English was perfect, measured, and carried weight that made the surrounding silence feel heavy. "You pulled my daughter from the water." It wasn't a question. Somehow this man already knew everything. But the way he said daughter made Boone's chest tighten. Not just any daughter. And the way the other warriors watched him suggested this wasn't just any chief. "I've come to discuss your reward." The word reward hung in the air like smoke from a signal fire. But there was something in the chief's tone that suggested this conversation was about far more than gratitude. Something that would change everything Boone thought he knew about his solitary life on the frontier. What he didn't know was that his simple act of courage had set in motion events that would challenge everything he believed about honor, destiny, and what it truly meant to save someone's life. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain when Boone Carter first heard the sound that would change his life forever. It wasn't the usual creak of leather or snort of his horse that broke the wilderness silence. It was something else entirely, a rhythmic splashing that didn't belong in these parts. He had been following the river for 3 days, keeping to the high ground where the view stretched for miles in every direction. The water below ran fast and deep, swollen from recent mountain storms that had turned gentle streams into torrents. Most travelers avoided this road entirely, preferring the longer but safer paths through the valleys. The splashing grew louder as he approached the river's edge. Through the morning mist, he could make out a figure in the water, someone fighting against the current with powerful, deliberate strokes. But something was wrong. The person was losing ground, being swept downstream toward a series of jagged rocks that jutted from the riverbed like broken teeth. Boone dismounted quickly, his boots finding purchase on the slippery bank. The figure in the water was larger than he had expected, moving with the controlled desperation of someone who knew how to swim, but was being overwhelmed by the river's raw power. The current was relentless, pulling the struggling form toward the rocks with each passing second. Without hesitation, he plunged into the icy water. The cold hit him like a physical blow, but he pushed forward, fighting his way through the churning rapids. The person ahead of him was a woman, he realized, but unlike any woman he had encountered in his years on the frontier. She was tall, powerfully built, with long black hair that streamed behind her like a banner in the current. Her buckskin clothing was elaborately decorated with beadwork that caught the morning light even while submerged. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, suggesting this was no ordinary traveler. But there was no time to wonder about her identity. The rocks were getting closer and her strength was clearly failing. Boone reached her just as her head went under for the 3rd time. His arm locked around her waist, and he was surprised by her solid weight and the muscle he felt beneath the wet leather. She didn't panic at his touch, didn't fight him as many drowning people did. Instead, she seemed to assess him even while struggling for air, her dark eyes meeting his with an intelligence that was both fierce and calculating. Together, they fought their way toward shore, the woman contributing what strength she had left to their escape from the river's grip. When they finally collapsed on the rocky bank, both gasping for breath, Boone found himself looking at someone who commanded respect even while soaking wet and vulnerable. She studied him with those penetrating eyes, and for a moment, He felt like he was the one being rescued, rather than the one who had done the rescuing. But as she stood to her full impressive height, wringing water from her long hair, Boone realized that saving her life might have been the easy part. The hard part was understanding why someone like her had been alone in such dangerous water in the first place. The woman's silence was more unsettling than any words could have been. She stood on the riverbank, water still dripping from her buckskin dress, and regarded Boone with an expression that seemed to weigh and measure everything about him. When she finally spoke, it was in a language he didn't recognize, though the tone suggested neither gratitude nor hostility, something more complex that he couldn't decipher. Boone raised his hands in a peaceful gesture, pointing to himself. "Boone," he said simply. "Boone Carter." She tilted her head slightly, considering this information. Then she placed a hand on her chest and spoke a single word that sounded like flowing water itself. "Ayanna." The formality of the introduction felt strange given that he had just pulled her from a raging river. But Boone sensed that with this woman, every gesture carried weight. She moved with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to command, and despite her recent ordeal, there was nothing defeated about her posture. Ayanna walked to where his horse stood patiently, studying the animal with the same intense scrutiny she had given Boone. She ran her hand along the horse's flank, and the animal responded to her touch with obvious approval. Even his horse, typically wary of strangers, seemed to recognize something authoritative in her presence. When she turned back to Boone, she gestured downstream, then shook her head with unmistakable firmness. The message was clear. Whatever had brought her to that dangerous stretch of river, she had no intention of continuing in that direction. Boone pointed toward his small camp in the distance, then to the sky, indicating the approaching evening. Ayanna followed his gaze and nodded once, a single decisive movement that suggested she was making a calculated decision rather than simply accepting help. At his camp, she moved with the efficiency of someone comfortable in the wilderness. She helped him gather wood for the fire without being asked, her movements precise and economical, but she also kept glancing toward the hills in the distance, as if expecting something or someone to appear. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their temporary shelter, Boone offered her dried meat from his supplies. She accepted it with a nod that might have been gratitude, though her expression remained guarded. They ate in companionable silence, the crackling fire the only sound between them. But when full darkness fell, Ayanna became restless. She stood frequently, scanning the horizon with the alertness of someone who knew how to read danger in the landscape. Her hand occasionally moved to her side, where Boone noticed the outline of a knife handle beneath her buckskin dress. Finally, she approached him and spoke again in her own language, this time with unmistakable urgency. She pointed to herself, then to the darkness beyond their fire, and shook her head emphatically. Then she pointed to him and made a gesture that clearly meant stay or wait. Before Boone could respond, she had gathered her still damp belongings and stepped into the shadows beyond the fire's light. He heard her movements for a few moments, then nothing but the normal sounds of the night wilderness. When morning came, she was gone. The only evidence of her presence was a set of footprints leading away from camp and a single eagle feather placed deliberately beside his bedroll, a feather that seemed far too perfect and placed too precisely to be coincidental. As Boone examined the feather in the morning light, he couldn't shake the feeling that his encounter with Ayanna had been something more than a simple rescue. But what that something might be remained as mysterious as the woman herself. Boone spent the morning studying Ayanna's footprints, trying to understand the story they told. The tracks led north into rocky terrain that would challenge even an experienced tracker, but they were deliberate, purposeful. This wasn't someone fleeing in panic. This was someone who knew exactly where she was going. He tucked the eagle feather into his saddlebag and continued his own journey westward, but found himself constantly glancing toward the northern hills where her trail had disappeared. The encounter had left him with more questions than answers, and questions had a way of eating at a man during long hours in the saddle. By midday, the sun was beating down mercilessly, and Boone decided to rest in the shade of a cluster of cottonwood trees near the river. He was checking his horse's shoes when he heard them, the unmistakable sound of multiple horses approaching from the east. The riders appeared as dark shapes against the bright horizon, moving with military precision. As they drew closer, Boone counted 12 mounted figures, all wearing the practical clothing of people who live their entire lives outdoors. But there was something ceremonial about their formation, something that suggested this wasn't a casual patrol or hunting party. The man leading them commanded attention even from a distance. He sat his horse with the kind of natural authority that couldn't be learned or faked. And as the group approached Boone's resting spot, that authority became even more apparent. He was older than the other riders, perhaps 50 winters, with silver threading through hair that was still predominantly black. Scars marked his face and hands. Not random wounds, but the deliberate marks of someone who had survived many battles. His clothing was both practical and ceremonial, decorated with symbols that spoke of leadership and respect, earned through deed rather than birth. When the group stopped 20 feet from Boone's position, the leader dismounted with fluid grace. His dark eyes took in every detail of Boone's camp, his horse, his weapons, and finally, Boone himself. The scrutiny felt thorough and professional, like being evaluated by someone who could read a man's character in the way he cared for his equipment. "You pulled my daughter from the water," the man said in English that was not only fluent but carried the cadence of someone who had learned it well enough to use it as a tool of diplomacy. The statement hit Boone like a physical blow, not because it was threatening, but because it revealed how much this man already knew. He hadn't asked if Boone had seen a woman, or if he had been near the river. He knew exactly what had happened, probably down to the smallest detail. "Your daughter?" Boone managed, though the words felt inadequate. The man stepped closer, and Boone could see that his eyes held the same intelligent intensity he had noticed in Ayanna. "Her name is Ayanna. She told me about the man who risked his life for a stranger." A dozen questions formed in Boone's mind, but the leader continued before he could voice any of them. "I am Nastas," he said, and the way he spoke his own name suggested it carried weight in these parts. "Chief of our people, and you, Boone Carter, have done something that requires acknowledgement." The word acknowledgement hung in the air with implications that Boone couldn't yet understand. But something in Nastas's tone suggested this conversation was about to become far more significant than a simple expression of parental gratitude. Nastas gestured for Boone to sit, transforming what could have been an intimidating confrontation into something more like a formal meeting. The other warriors remained mounted but relaxed their postures slightly, though Boone noticed they maintained positions that would allow them to respond quickly if needed. "My daughter was not in that river by accident," Nastas began, settling himself cross-legged on the ground with the ease of someone who had conducted important business in similar circumstances countless times. "She was there because of duty, because of honor, because sometimes the most dangerous path is the only path that leads where we need to go." Boone found himself leaning forward despite his caution. Every word Nastas spoke seemed to carry layers of meaning, and he sensed that understanding those layers might be crucial to understanding why 12 armed warriors had tracked him down. "3 days ago, our scouts brought word of strangers moving through our territory," Nastas continued. "Men who showed no respect for the land, who took what they pleased and left destruction in their wake. My daughter volunteered to cross the river and learn their true intentions." The pieces began falling into place in Boone's mind. Ayanna hadn't been crossing the river for pleasure or convenience. She had been on a reconnaissance mission that had nearly cost her life. "The current was stronger than expected," Nastas said, and for the first time, Boone heard something that might have been vulnerability in his voice. "She is strong, skilled, but the river shows mercy to no one." Boone nodded, remembering how even Ayanna's obvious strength had been no match for the churning water. "She fought it well, but another few minutes." "Yes," Nastas said simply, "another few minutes, and my people would have lost not just a daughter, but our next leader." The weight of that revelation settled over Boone like a heavy blanket. He hadn't just pulled a woman from the river, he had saved the future chief of what was obviously a significant tribe. "This creates what my people call a debt of balance," Nastas explained. "When someone saves the life of a leader, especially when that person risks their own life in the process, the debt cannot be repaid with simple gratitude." One of the mounted warriors said something in their language, and Nastas nodded before turning back to Boone. "My men remind me that you could have continued your journey. Many would have. The river was dangerous, the outcome uncertain, but you chose risk over safety, duty to a stranger over duty to yourself." Boone shifted uncomfortably. "Any decent person would have done the same." "No," Nastas said firmly. "Many people speak of what they would do. Few actually do it when the moment comes, and fewer still do it for someone who is clearly not of their own people." The chief stood and walked to his horse, retrieving something from his saddlebags. When he returned, he held a bundle wrapped in soft leather. "This is why I have come," he said, his voice taking on a formal tone that made even his warriors straighten in their saddles. To discuss your reward. Boone's pulse quickened. The way Nastas spoke the word reward suggested this wasn't going to be a simple gift of supplies or safe passage through their territory. But first, Nastas continued, you must understand that what I am about to offer will change your life completely. Once offered, it cannot be taken back. Once accepted, it cannot be undone. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of horses shifting and the distant murmur of the river where everything had started. Nastas carefully unwrapped the leather bundle, revealing an intricately crafted medallion that caught the afternoon sunlight. The metalwork was unlike anything Boone had seen. Not the rough silver ornaments common to frontier trading posts, but something that spoke of ancient craftsmanship and deep cultural significance. This medallion has been in my family for 7 generations, Nastas explained, holding it so Boone could see the detailed engravings that covered its surface. It is given only to those who have proven themselves worthy of our deepest trust and respect. Boone studied the medallion, recognizing that while beautiful, it was clearly not the complete reward Nastas had mentioned. The chief's formal tone and the serious expressions of his warriors suggested something far more significant was coming. But the medallion is only a symbol, Nastas continued, rewrapping it carefully. The true reward is what it represents: acceptance into our tribe as a full member, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. The words hit Boone with unexpected force. In all his years on the frontier, moving from place to place without permanent ties, he had never considered the possibility of truly belonging somewhere. The idea was both appealing and terrifying. You would have land to call your own, Nastas explained. Protection of the tribe, a voice in our councils, and... He paused, glancing toward his warriors before continuing. If you prove yourself worthy over time, the possibility of marriage to someone of appropriate standing. Boone's mind immediately went to Ayanna, remembering her intelligent eyes and commanding presence. The implication in Nastas's words seemed clear, though nothing was being stated directly. But, Nastas continued, his tone becoming more serious, accepting this offer means leaving your old life behind completely. You would live as we live, follow our ways, accept our laws. There would be no going back to the solitary existence you have known. One of the warriors spoke briefly in their language, and Nastas nodded. My men remind me that we do not make this offer lightly. In 20 years of leadership, I have extended it only twice before, both times to men who had saved the lives of tribal members under circumstances that proved their character beyond question. Boone found himself staring at the wrapped medallion, trying to process what was being offered. A home, a family, a people to belong to. Everything his rootless existence had lacked. You don't have to answer immediately, Nastas said, though his tone suggested this was not an offer that could remain open indefinitely. But you should know that our scouts report more of those strangers entering our territory, the ones my daughter was investigating when she nearly drowned. Their intentions toward our people are unclear, but their actions suggest they may pose a threat. The implication was obvious. Joining the tribe would mean accepting not just the benefits of membership, but also the dangers that came with it. If you accept our offer, Nastas continued, you would be expected to stand with us against any threats to our people. Your life would become bound to ours in ways that go far deeper than simple friendship or alliance. Boone looked up to meet Nastas's steady gaze, realizing that his answer to this question would determine not just his own future, but possibly the futures of everyone present. The weight of decision settled heavily on Boone's shoulders as he considered Nastas's offer. Everything about his life had been defined by movement, by the freedom to choose his own direction, without considering the needs or expectations of others. The idea of permanent commitment felt both foreign and strangely appealing. May I ask, Boone said carefully, what happened to the 2 men who accepted this offer before? Nastas's expression grew solemn. The first proved himself worthy in all ways. He became one of our most respected warriors and lived among us for 30 years until age claimed him. His children still carry on his legacy within the tribe. He paused before continuing. The second discovered that the life of shared responsibility was not what he had expected. After 2 years, he chose to leave. We parted as friends, but he could never return. The honesty of the answer struck Boone as significant. Nastas wasn't trying to hide the challenges or paint an unrealistic picture of what membership in the tribe would mean. The strangers you mentioned, Boone said, How serious is the threat they represent? One of the warriors leaned forward in his saddle and spoke rapidly to Nastas, who listened intently before translating. Grey Wolf says they have been taking horses without permission, hunting in areas sacred to our people, and showing disrespect to the land itself. Yesterday they burned a section of forest simply to clear their path. The casual destruction described bothered Boone more than outright hostility might have. Men who showed such disregard for the land and its inhabitants were unpredictable and potentially dangerous to everyone in the area. How many of them are there? Boone asked. Our scouts count 15, maybe 20, Nastas replied. Well armed but poorly organized. They move like men who are used to taking what they want without consequence. Boone found himself thinking about Ayanna, remembering her alertness around the campfire and the way she had scanned the horizon as if expecting trouble. If she had been investigating these men when the river nearly claimed her life, their threat to the tribe was clearly being taken seriously. If I were to accept your offer, Boone said slowly, would I be expected to help deal with these strangers? You would be expected to stand with your people, Nastas replied. As we would stand with you. That is what it means to belong somewhere. The simplicity of the statement carried profound weight. Boone had spent years avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement, preferring the clean independence of answering only to himself. But he was beginning to realize that independence and isolation weren't the same thing, and that one could become a prison as confining as any jail. I would need to know more about your ways, Boone said. Your laws, your customs. I wouldn't want to bring dishonor to your people through ignorance. Something that might have been approval flickered in Nastas's eyes. Ayanna has volunteered to serve as your guide, if you accept. She knows our customs better than anyone, and she has already declared that your character has been proven through your actions. The mention of Ayanna sent an unexpected warmth through Boone's chest. The thought of learning from her, of seeing that intelligent intensity applied to teaching rather than evaluation, was more appealing than he cared to admit. How long do I have to decide? Boone asked. The sun will set in 4 hours, Nastas replied. By the time it rises again, you must give me your answer. The deadline was closer than Boone had expected, but perhaps that was appropriate. Some decisions were best made quickly, before doubt could cloud judgment or fear could overcome courage. As the afternoon wore on, Nastas and his warriors made camp nearby, giving Boone space to consider his decision, while making it clear they would wait for his answer. The proximity felt respectful rather than threatening, but it also ensured there would be no avoiding the choice that lay before him. Boone found himself walking to the riverbank, where he had first pulled Ayanna from the churning water. The current still ran fast and deep, indifferent to the human dramas that played out along its shores. Standing there, he tried to imagine what his life might look like if he accepted Nastas's offer. The solitary existence he had known for years suddenly seemed less like freedom and more like emptiness. He thought about the countless nights he had made camp alone, with only his horse for company, and no one to care whether he lived or died. The independence he had prized so highly was beginning to feel like a form of exile. But accepting Nastas's offer would mean more than just gaining companionship. It would mean responsibility for the welfare of others, participation in decisions that affected an entire community, and the possibility of conflict with the strangers who were threatening the tribe's territory. As if summoned by his thoughts, the sound of approaching footsteps made him turn. Ayanna emerged from the trees, moving with the same silent grace he remembered from their brief time together. She had changed from her water-damaged buckskin into clothing that was both practical and ceremonial, decorated with beadwork that seemed to tell stories in patterns he couldn't read. My father says you are considering his offer, she said in English that was accented but clear. I am, Boone replied, though I'm not sure I'm the right person for what he has in mind. Ayanna stepped closer, studying him with those penetrating eyes. When you pulled me from the river, did you think about whether you were the right person for that task? The question caught him off guard. No, I just acted. Exactly, she said. You saw someone in danger and responded without calculating the risk to yourself or wondering if you were qualified to help. That is why my father believes you would fit well among our people. She gestured toward the river. Our customs teach that when someone saves a life, they become responsible for that life in some way. But they also teach that the saved person becomes responsible for the life of their rescuer. Boone felt his pulse quicken at the implications of her words. What does that mean exactly? It means, Ayanna said, stepping closer until he could smell the sage and sweetgrass in her hair, that if you join our tribe, you would not be alone in learning our ways. I would be bound by honor to help you succeed. The warmth in her voice suggested that this binding would not feel like a burden to either of them. The strangers my father mentioned, Boone said. How dangerous are they, really? Ayana's expression grew serious. Dangerous enough that our scouts report they are moving closer to our main village. Dangerous enough that our warriors are preparing for the possibility of conflict. If you join us, you would be joining us at a time when your skills might be tested quickly. She paused, then added softly, but also at a time when an extra warrior, especially one whose courage has already been proven, would be most valuable to our people. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, and Boone knew his time for decision was running short. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Boone made his way back to where Nastas waited by the fire. The chief looked up as he approached, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts or expectations. I have an answer, Boone said, settling himself across from Nastas. The warriors gathered around the fire fell silent, and even Ayana, who had followed him from the riverbank, seemed to hold her breath. I accept your offer, Boone continued, feeling the weight of the words as he spoke them. But I want you to know that I've never belonged anywhere before. I may not be good at it at first. A smile spread across Nastas's face, the first truly warm expression Boone had seen from him. The best members of any tribe are often those who choose to belong rather than those who are born to it. The chief reached for the leather bundle and carefully unwrapped the medallion once more. This has been waiting for you since the moment you entered that river, he said, rising and stepping forward. As Nastas placed the medallion around Boone's neck, the metal felt warm against his chest, as if it had absorbed the heat from the fire. The weight of it was substantial but not uncomfortable, a tangible reminder of the commitment he had just made. Welcome to our people, Boone Carter, Nastas said formally. From this day forward, your welfare is our welfare. Your struggles are struggles. Your victories are victories. The warriors around the fire voiced their approval in their own language, and Boone was surprised by how much their acceptance meant to him. But it was Ayana's smile that truly warmed him, bright and genuine in the firelight. Now, Nastas continued, his tone becoming more businesslike, we have immediate matters to attend to. The strangers I mentioned have moved closer to our territory. Tomorrow, we must deal with them before they pose a greater threat to our people. Boone nodded, understanding that his first test as a member of the tribe would come sooner than expected. What do you need me to do? Your knowledge of how such men think will be valuable, Nastas replied. Many of our warriors have fought other tribes, but few have dealt with the kind of men who destroy for pleasure rather than purpose. Over the next hour, as plans were made and strategies discussed, Boone found himself contributing ideas and asking questions that were received with respect and consideration. For the first time in his adult life, he was part of something larger than himself. As the fire died down and the group prepared to rest, Ayana approached him one final time. My father's offer included the possibility of marriage, she said quietly, her directness both surprising and refreshing. But that is a choice that would be ours to make. In time, if we find we suit each other. Boone met her gaze steadily. I'd like that chance to find out. She nodded once, satisfied. Then we will see what the future brings. The next morning, as they rode together toward the tribal village where Boone would begin his new life, he realized that the unexpected reward Nastas had offered was far more valuable than gold or land. It was the chance to belong somewhere, to be part of something meaningful, and perhaps to find the kind of companionship that made all of life's struggles worthwhile. The rescue in the river had lasted only minutes, but its consequences would shape the rest of his days. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and destiny intertwine in the most unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you these authentic stories. Your support means everything to us.